Okay, I wanted to make a video on how to compose a team in tower defense games. This can apply for any tower defense game you're playing, but I'm mostly specifically talking about enemy vanguards and ALS, but this can work for any tower defense game and all tower defense games. So there are different categories of units, and I'll go ahead and put those down. I'm gonna lay down all the categories as we start, so there's no confusion. So categories can being considered here. Excuse my stuttering. DPS, support units, and farms. And each of these have a subcategory. Well, not farms, they're self-explanatory. DPS, you have a late game DPS and an early game DPS, which I'll use these letters right here for. In support, you have two different types of support. You have regular supports like slow, stuns, all that stuff, slow, stuns, freezes. Then you have buffer units, which buff your unit's damage by a certain amount. So like, for example, Astolfo and enemy vanguards can buff your unit's damage by like 20%. So that's to be considered buffer. And now there's a second category, subcategory to these two, which is considered a hybrid, which is combining two of these. So it can be like late game, early game, late game support, late game buffer units, support buffer, support early game. You get the idea. It's any of these two, sometimes three of them. Very rarely is it all four of them. But it combines those two. Farms, only one category, and that's just farms. So let's get into different types of game modes in tower defense games. So you have progressive, and infinite. Most tower defense teams have these modes. There's also tournaments as well, but we're not gonna get into that because the team for that is tricky. It changes each time. So you have progressive and infinite, and each of these have subcategories. In fact, well, infinite doesn't have a subcategory; it's by itself. Progressive does have subcategories, that being 15 waves or less, and 15 waves or higher. Now I'm going to base off enemy vanguard standards. So what I mean by 15 waves is whatever the standard wave is, right? Story mode wave, whatever the standard waves are. If it has the standard amount of waves and less, usually you get less money than what you would get in comparison to more than the average amount of waves. Things like boss events, raids as well also have that. Rifts as well. Things that are like more than the average amount of waves, and you get more money from those because you have more time. So what teams should you use for each thing? So I'll go over multiple different teams. I'll go over two teams for each mode. So one progressive and one infinite, and I'll go over two teams. Have some variety here. So whenever you can use a hybrid unit, use a hybrid unit. So progressive mode is going to have two different types of teams. It's going to have 15 waves or less, or 15 waves or more. So what should you use for 15 waves or less? You should try to save as much money as possible. But for the most part, you want late game, early game, support, 2 farms. That's kind of the standard for that. That will get you through most things. Actually, probably all things. That's like the golden rubric right here. However, in progressive mode, you want to save as much money as possible. So take for Sukuna, for example, in enemy vanguards. He is a hybrid as a late game / early game. So you can have that hybrid in here. You have a late game, early game, support, and 2 farms. That will save you money. Now, what team can you use that looks like this? I'd recommend Escanor, because you can just place him down on placement damage. His damage is really high on placement. Sukuna, if you have this Vanguard familiar. Yusung Wu, Weather Report, 2 farms. Really cheap team and really high damage. Now, if you don't want to use a late game, early game, you feel like you have enough money, you can use 2 late games, which I recommend using Kaguya for your second late game. More than 15 waves. Now this, you can use late game, early game, support, 2 farms, same as before, but this time you don't need to make shortcuts because you have so much more time. But I still recommend using hybrids. So what team would you be looking at for this? Well, you're looking at 2 farms, whatever farms you have in that game mode, or whatever game you're playing. For enemy vanguards, it would be Takaroda and Speed card, I gotta mention that this is all for, I'm using Anime Vanguards as my example here. What team I should be looking at for this one? So you want 2 farms, Griffith, Peace and Jinwoo, and then 2 late games of your choice that you have enough money to max out. Since we have a lot of money in this game mode with more than 15 waves, I'd go with Escanor, and you can actually max them out this time. And something like Monkey King or Guts, since you can also get them pretty high level. So that's a pretty good rubric there for that one. So this is time for Infinite, same example. Infinites usually have about 1 team that I always recommend. And that is late game, support, and 2 farms. Actually no, 1 farm. So 4 late games. So okay, how do I control Z in this? 4 late games, support, and 1 farm. You want as much damage as possible. So what do you think would this look like for you? I'd recommend using 1 farm, Takarota for Anime Vanguards. I'll write down that names. Griffith. And there's also a subcategory of DPS, like late game DPS and early game DPS. That I didn't mention, I was keeping it a secret on purpose. That's definitely what was happening there. And that's damage that scales with the waves. Things like Sun Jinwoo, where his shadow health scales off enemy health. So he can get more damage per wave, which is definitely what you want. I recommend Sun Jinwoo. Sid, because he also has scaling damage abilities. Then I'll use Guts here for full AoE raw DPS. If you have Sukuna with his Vanguard familiar, definitely use him. If not, Monkey King also works. They're not full AoE, but I can't think of anything else right now that would be a full AoE. It's really good for damage. And I forgot to mention, how do you play those teams? For progressive mode, you usually want to put down both farms, then your early game, to deal with the early waves of enemies while you do your farming. If your early game is struggling, you can use your support to help them out. Most times you don't really need to. But then when you have enough money, place both your late games and then your support down. And that's usually how you play that type of team. Infinite mode doesn't really matter. You have time, enough money. You can play your units however you want. Just make sure you have good placement. And they're all maxed out. So yeah, hopefully this helps you guys with figuring out tower defense games. Hope you guys have an amazing day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.